the United States and the international community seek a resolution to our differences with Iran.
Welcome to Thursday's edition of TimesCast. As President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of Iran grabs headlines at the UN, a look at how sanctions are affecting the Iranian people.
The people of Iran are hurting by the sanctions.
The writer Jonathan Ames tours the Brooklyn of Bored to Death.
It's a TV show capturing the neighborhoods that we live in.
And the Times op-ed page turns 40.
We get between 1,500 and 1,600 unsolicited submissions a week.
David Sanger talks with the Iranian journalist Omid Memarian about President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's annual visit to the UN.
You know, the UN opening has become something of an annual ritual now that President Ahmadinejad shows up early, gives a pretty familiar speech about American imperialism, says the nuclear program is for entirely peaceful purposes. And while he gets on TV a lot doing this, at this point it's a pretty familiar show.
Yes, the US media, they love to have interviews with him. Back home, he says people want to hear what I say, and he wants to get the attention of the Obama administration.
Well, the interesting thing, though, is that back home, there's talk of impeaching him.
That's exactly true. We have seen a very serious divide among the political elite in Iran that are criticizing Ahmadinejad for his performance. That's why we saw Ahmadinejad's speech was really mild. He didn't touch on very critical, provocative topics that we have seen from him before.
One of the most interesting dynamics that's underway here now is whether or not the sanctions will in fact change Iranian behavior in the nuclear program.
The people of Iran are hurting by the sanctions. They feel the damage, and they feel in the daily routine. They feel that. I spoke to my mom and my friends in Iran, and they're telling me how the sanctions, little by little, are affecting their lives, their daily lives. So we see that kind of overwhelming frustration.
So far, we haven't seen any organized uprisings since the June 12th election. In fact, the government's been pretty good at putting them down.
Practically, we are seeing that the people who support Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the lower middle class, or the people that Ahmadinejad, his base, that he can support them financially, they are hitting by these sanctions. And little by little, we will see that kind of frustration shows itself in different ways. People, when they cannot find a way to express themselves and they cannot achieve what they want, they come to the street and try to oppose the government.
The writer Jonathan Ames shows Milena Rysick around the real-life Brooklyn set of the HBO series Bored to Death.
Do you recognize this coffee shop? Okay, no fair if you live in Boerum Hill, Brooklyn. But if you do live here, you might also know Jonathan Ames, the creator of the HBO show Bored to Death. It's about a struggling New York writer who moonlights as a private eye and just happens to be named Jonathan Ames.
Ames here.
The real Jonathan Ames lives in the neighborhood and often scouts locations for the show.
You shot something at this coffee shop, right?
Yes.
Did you choose this coffee shop because it's blocks from your apartment?
Well, yes.
Jonathan gave me a little tour of some of his favorite locations in Brooklyn.
Part of this thing in talking about the locations of Brooklyn, I mean, this is an old story at this point, but Brooklyn is our left bank.
There's no Toronto standing in for New York on this show. That's the real Dumbo, Fort Greene, and Brighton Beach.
It's a TV show capturing the neighborhoods that we live in. Unlike Law and Order, which is Manhattan, or Sex and the City, which is Manhattan. And the reality is, personally, I know almost no one that lives in Manhattan anymore.
Even though Jonathan lives and works in Brooklyn, he's not above making fun of the borough or its residents.
You're not even trying. Can we get out of Brooklyn? It's just not as cool as I thought it was going to be.
Cool or not, Jonathan loves it. Even the famously dirty Gowanus Canal.
So here we are at the Gowanus Canal, which is a part of Brooklyn that's not usually celebrated, and we can smell why.
I like the way it smells. It smells earthy to me. I love the Gowanus Canal. I featured it in season 1, again in season 2. But yeah, so I like the grittiness. I like the beautiful gritty.
David Shipley, the editor of the Times op-ed page, on 40 years of who and what makes the page.
What we look for in op-ed is what I think the page has always looked for, which is surprise.
And that was the point of that article. What if Santa Claus was gay?
We get between 1,500 and 1,600 unsolicited submissions a week.
The administration was never going to admit it made a mistake unless they were confronted.
What I said about Madonna was that she was going to liberate the entire young generation of women to learn how to be able to handle their own sexuality.
The page was actually the invention of John Oakes, who was the editorial page editor at the time, and Harrison Salisbury, the famous foreign correspondent, both of whom felt that the Times should have a space within itself to have a venue for outside voices. It did so in a wildly prominent way, too. It didn't bury the outside pieces back by the shipping news. It put them opposite the editorial page. That's the meaning of op-ed. Op-ed in the early days was very satirical, very loud. The opinion was incredibly forceful. We live in an age now where there are a lot of loud voices, and maybe it's incumbent on op-ed to do what the rest of the world isn't doing, which is to be a little bit more quiet, a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more considered.
Join us again tomorrow for another edition of TimesCast.